Hi guys, and welcome to this session in the CRM module. The CRM module is the Customer Relations Management module, and in Workbook it's used for the pre-sale stage of jobs. So in the jobs book, normally you would call a client, and any project on a client would be called a job. Within the CRM module, a client would be called a prospect, and a job would be called a pipeline. So what we're looking at here is the client and prospects list. And this will give you a list of all of the clients and prospects within the system, depending on your current filter. So up in the top right-hand corner here, you can see I have opened my filter and set myself in as responsible. So right now I can see we have one client and one prospect. The reason that we're seeing both in here is that even though you've already previously won over a client, they might have a new project that you can win or that they're not necessarily just giving to you straight away. So that would mean that you can create a pipeline on this client and start working towards winning that. Otherwise, what you will be doing, as you see just below with Sunset Holdings, you'll be creating a prospect, so someone you haven't worked with before or haven't won a project from before, and creating a pipeline on them. And the way you go about this is that you click on this little person up here in the top left-hand corner, add new prospect, and then a little pop-up will come up. So in here, you cannot change the type, it's locked. If you want to create something else than a prospect, you have to do it from the resource book. All the way over on the left-hand side, the two little masks. Now, you have to fill in the name. We could say Microsoft, for example, and it'll fill in the initials, but it can basically just be anything. For example, prospect test 1, and it'll change the initials accordingly. However, you can change these if you'd like. Furthermore, you can choose to create a new pipeline straight away. And if you already have a pipeline with the same name, you can ignore the duplicate check. So that means that you can create several with the same name. For now, let's just hit create new pipeline on this prospect and hit OK. So this will bring up two cards. If I move these to the side here, so you can see I have one card for my prospect where I can fill in all of the basic info. I can add in new contacts here on the left-hand side. So that could be the main person I'm in contact with. I can add in activities. We'll get back to that in a moment. I can have a conversation in the prospect, just as I would be able to on a task, on a client, on a briefing, everywhere in the system. And then I can add in profile info. And this might differ from company to company. In my case, for type and subject, we've already predefined some. So for type, for example, we can choose number of employees. And then in subject, we can choose whether it's less than 50 or more than 50 employees. And then you have a free text field as well. In this case, it might be relevant to specify the exact amount of employees, especially if it's a larger client, right? So we could say, oh, it's actually 300 employees, just to give some more information. Furthermore, I can see the pipelines on this prospect. On the next icon here, the CRM icon. And this pipeline currently don't really have any information input on it. And that's because we've just created it, and we'll get back to that in a moment. Then lastly, I can add in documents or emails, just like I would be able to on a job or a task similar, right? So once I'm done filling in the basic info, I'll go ahead and close this card, and then I will move on to my pipeline card. So in the very first icon here, I can then similarly input all of the basic info about the pipeline. Up at the top, we have the pipeline name. prospect test 1 is not really a fitting name. So for example, it could be not really a fitting name. So for example, it could be a new website. Furthermore, I'm the responsible for this pipeline. And my contact, you can see there's none in here because we didn't add in any contacts on the prospect. But if you've added in some, you can choose them from this list. Then you would be choosing the rating. And this is how probable it is that you'll win this pipeline. So it could be low, high, very high, or extremely high. And you'll change this on the pipeline as you go along and you've had more meetings, forwarded some quotes, exchanged information and scope, and so forth. Furthermore, you can change the status. So again, along the way, first off, it'll just be a prospect. Could move on to qualification. Perhaps you need some analysis, make a value proposition, forward a price quote, then even negotiate and review, and then lastly, one. So if we choose, for example, negotiation and review, you can see that the probability now changes to 90%. We have predefined in our settings that once we are in the negotiation review stage, it is pretty probable that we're going to win this. Furthermore, you'll be choosing the currency, so that would change, of course, based on the country that they are in. And you would be inputting a gross profit. But before we do that, we just want to take a look at the start date and the months. So when I hover my cursor over months, I can see that there is a little log icon, so I can't actually change it here. And we'll get back to that in a moment because we need to make a payment plan in order for it to be on multiple months. So let's head into gross profit. Let's say, for example, that we expect this to be worth 10,000. You can, however, see that the expected gross profit is less than 10,000 because it's actually based off of the probability, right? So 90% of 10,000 is 9,000. And then furthermore, we can input a gross revenue. So of course the difference between these two is the gross profit is what you actually earn and the revenue is including your costs as well. So this could be quite a lot higher than your gross profit in case, for example, that you need to have external purchases or spend a large amount of hours on this. But let's say, for example, that it is going to be for 20,000. Lastly, you can input a comment, free text, so that when your colleagues take a look at this, they'll be able to see your specific comment. Once you've done this, you move on to the pipeline resource activities. And this was the one that we chose before to save for later. So a pipeline activity is quite similar to an event in Outlook. So in Outlook, you normally say on the 16th between 10 and 11, I have a meeting with a client, for example. It's the same here. So if we click create new activity, we'll be choosing the resource, the prospect. Then we will be choosing the contact, so we can add in a new one if we haven't already made one. And then we'll be choosing the activity type. So are we doing a meeting? Perhaps we're just doing some internal follow-up. Are we making an invite, or perhaps there's just a rumor of new business, so we need to reach out to them to hear whether or not this is something that we could work with them on. Perhaps we're making the initial contact afterwards, or maybe it's just a phone call. Again, these are predefined in your settings and can be completely different from what you see here. Let's say that it's a meeting. We will be choosing the start date, so that could be Friday the 16th between 9 and 10. Now, if I want to see this in my Outlook, I can actually do so by clicking the export button. So when I hover my cursor, it'll say export to external calendar. Now keep in mind that within my settings, which we've covered in a previous webinar, you actually need to set up your calendar with WorkBook in order for this to work, of course. Furthermore, you then choose the responsible. In this case, it'll be myself, but it could also be a colleague who must attend this meeting instead. If you have multiple entities within your workbook, you can choose the specific company in this drop-down. And then most importantly, you will be choosing the pipeline, which will be the one we just created called new website. Then I can input some activity text. So that might be the location of the actual meeting, or maybe just a note to myself of anything that I need to bring along. Then lastly, I will be inputting a source. You don't necessarily need to do so. So a source is kind of a hashtag, similar to what you see on social media or other places around Workbook. And it's simply used to be able to search by this specific activity later on. So if you don't remember the exact activity text or similar, you can input a tag here. So let's say this is a tag, enter. And then I can search by this is a tag, and then this activity will pop up later on. We covered off the search module in a previous session as well, if you'd like to go back and see that. Now the next step here would just be to hit OK. However, if you want to keep the history or keep track of what has already been done on this pipeline, you can actually go down and click set this activity as done. So if this has already previously been done, let's say that we actually did this on the 12th and we just want to be able to view that and keep track of it in our workbook, I can set it as done, so I don't need to be doing this, and then later on I can refer to this and see that it's been done on the 12th between 9 and 10, it was with person A, and so forth. Let's go ahead and close this down. So that's how you create activities. Activities on pipeline can also be viewed over here on the left-hand side within the tasks module. Just as you would see your tasks and to do, you have one called My Activities as well. Now the next step for this pipeline is to create a payment plan. So before I mentioned that the months was locked to 1 month, and that's because it is determined by your payment plan. So in here, I can set up multiple payment dates. So when we're creating this new website, for example, I could say that, okay, today's date, we have the first 50% of the fee, and then 3 months later, perhaps, in February, we can say last 50% of the fee. All we need to do then is split the amount. So if I type in 5,000 here, it'll subtract 5,000 from the second one here. That's how you create a payment plan. If you've set up a price quote before, you might find this familiar because it's actually the exact same as a payment plan on a price quote. So if you win this pipeline and convert it to a job, this payment plan will be carried over to the price quote on that job. We'll get back to that in a moment. So let's move on and take a look at the next icon here, which is the pipeline budget share. In here, let's say that I am not the only one working on this, so I'll start by adding in myself and my colleague Barry White, who's also working on this. So I could say, for example, that I'm allowed to spend 70% of the budget and Barry is allowed to spend the last 30%. Furthermore, we can input a comment to specify what the budget is to be spent on, or really just anything you'd like. Similarly, we have pipeline partner settings. So if you're not working with an internal person, but you're working with an external partner, you can mark this as a shared pipeline. So that means, of course, that part of the revenue will go to them. And in here, you will click the sharing date. So when did it start from? You will choose the specific partner. You can create them in the resource book. You'll be choosing a contact from that partner. And then you'll input some partner information. For example, that 40% of the total profit is to go to the partner. Now, let's say that you did not win this pipeline. It went to a competitor. It's quite valuable to input this information into your workbook, especially if you're losing a lot of projects to a specific competitor. So you can keep track of this to reflect on, to review, maybe even change something in order to win these prospects. You mark something as lost in here by clicking the pipeline lost information, the little sad smiley face. So in here you can tick the lost button. And then once you've done that, you can choose the reason. So either perhaps you were too expensive, the client didn't have interest, or there was a bad chemistry between you and the client. And then you can choose the competitor that you lost it to and input a description. This is also useful as the revenue that you input on a pipeline is used for forecasting. So if you mark it as lost, the forecast value will be 0. So this pipeline will no longer have value in your forecast. However, if you instead win the pipeline, you go to convert pipeline to job. That's the little lunchbox icon, which is the same as the jobs module icon that you see on the left-hand side. In here, you click convert pipeline to a job, and WorkBook will then go up and say, hey, this prospect is still a prospect. You want to convert it to a client in order to create a job. And then you can say convert. Are you sure you want to convert the pipeline as well to a job? However, now the job has been created and it'll be located within the jobs module in the quotation stage or status 0. And you might remember the stage by color, so it's the yellow one. So that's kind of how you manage a pipeline within the CRM module. Now, we just looked at the pipeline cards, and of course you won't be looking at the cards all the time. So just to give a little more standard view, what you'd be doing is that you'd be going in here to your clients and prospect list. They will be listed out, and you can of course up in top right hand corner sort in the filter. Then down in the bottom you can see all of the basic info, just as we saw on the prospect card, and again add in contacts, activities, conversation, profile, pipeline, or documents and emails. However, if you want to take a closer look at all of your pipelines instead, so that they are the main subject in the list, you can click the pipelines over here on the left-hand side, and then based upon your filter, it'll load the pipelines. In this case, I chose to only see the ones that I'm responsible for. So here we both down at the bottom have the same view of the prospect, and over on the right hand side we have the pipeline card, again with the same details as we saw in the pop-ups. If I wish, I can, on the little CRM icon, close the pipeline card, or on the little name card here I can close the prospect card. In here I of course also have a filter where you can see I've set myself as responsible. Now, furthermore, when it comes to your activities, over here on the left-hand side you can see My Activities. And in here, you'll just see the ones that you are responsible for. In the top right-hand corner, we have the filter. However, the activity responsible is actually locked to you. So if you want to see all activities across all pipelines, you need to go to the one called All Activities here on the left-hand side. Then you can see we have a whole lot of more created across the various pipelines we have in the system. So that's how it looks when it's not in the pop-ups that you saw right after creating the prospects. And the way that you manage it, as mentioned, is of course on here on the pipelines, over on the right-hand side. Along the way, you might change the comment, you might change the stage, the status, the rating. And then finally, when you win it, if you win it, you convert the pipeline to a job on the little lunchbox icon. Now the gross profit that we input here, we're actually able to report on this and make a forecast. And we do that in the one called 12-month summary forecast. In here we have 3 tabs. So you can see up here, we can see jobs in process and pipeline projects. And we also have a forecast filter. So in the forecast filter, I can choose what I want to report by, or I could just remove it entirely, hit apply here, and then it'll show for everything, right? So now we have a graphical representation of our pipelines and also our jobs. So in the bottom hand view, we have some different titles, and only 3 of them are regarding pipelines. The first one is planned, and planned is a pipeline that you have not started working on yet, but you are aware that it is a business opportunity, and that's why over on the right hand side in the filter, we can choose whether or not to show planned amount, because we're not really doing anything actively at the moment to win this pipeline, but it is possible. Then we have the 2 last pipeline stages or titles, which is lead and opportunity. So on the pipeline card, we can choose the current stage, right? Whether it's lead or opportunity, which is based off of the probability. And then the total amount, the total value of that pipeline will be reflected in here and spread across the months based upon your payment plan. And also the probability percentage. So again, if you have, for example, a gross profit of 10,000, but the probability is 75%, it'll only show 7,500. So 75% of the gross profit. Furthermore, when you win the project or the pipeline, you'll be converting it into an actual job. And that job will be in the quotation stage. So that's actually also reflected in here. And then the price quote on that job is the one that will be reflected in value here, spread across the months based on the payment plan of that price quote. The same thing goes for the next stage of the job, which is in process, when you actually start working on it and you're done with quoting and negotiating with the client. However, this view is a summarization, a graphical view. If you want some more detail, you can head into the second tab, which is jobs in process, and that includes both quotation and the stage in process. So in here we have all of the basic information about the job, the client, name, start date, etc. The interesting part is that when you scroll out to the right, you can see the total quoted amount, the total work in progress amount, and the remaining amount. So that will be the quoted amount minus what you've actually spent so far. And then for the coming months here, we can see the expected revenue based upon the payment plan of the price quote. Similarly, we have one for pipeline projects. So in here, we can see all of our current pipelines. Again, the basic information, the total amount, which is the pre-sale stage, of course, of the quoted amount, so an actual job. You can see how many months that it's active and also the revenue spread across the months that it is active in. So this will kind of give you a column by column view and the specific pipeline or jobs instead of just a summarization in a graph. If you wish, up here in the top, you can include quotation in process jobs and also show cold or lost pipelines. Normally these are not included as the probability is second to none. But that's what there is for the CRM module. It's the pre-sales stage. So it's limited how much information you actually fill in here, but it's a good way to keep track of all of your pre-sale stage projects. An important note though is that as you go along the way, you will be spending time making perhaps some purchases, some representation, taking the prospect out for dinner or similar. And these costs need to be registered someplace. And there are 2 ways that you would normally go about this. The first way is the sales client we have within WorkBook. So it's a non-billable client that is created by default in everyone's system. What you then do is you create a job on the sales client. So if we revert back to our clients and prospects list, we can see Sunset Holdings Inc. They are not a client yet, so I cannot create a job on them. So what I do is I create a job called Sunset Holdings Inc. on my non-billable sales client, where I then can record all of my time, my expenses spent in order to win this prospect. Later on, I can then report on the sales client and then see for the specific job for this prospect how much time I've spent. Now that's option one. The second option is to create Sunset Holdings Inc. as an actual client. And what you'll then do is create a non-billable job on Sunset Holdings Inc. where you will enter all of your hour expenses or other purchases made. The only difference between these two options is the grouping. So when you print an expense report, normally it's grouped by client and then job. So if you create it on the sales client, it's of course located underneath that grouping within the report. But if you create it on Sunset Holdings Inc., it will be grouped underneath the actual client itself. So it just depends on how you want to view it. Some would like to see all of their pre-sales expenses underneath the same header. And that's why it's quite useful to just create it on the sales client. Specifically also because it is non-billable by default and cannot be changed. So there's no room for error on that point. And then others would just like to see the non-billable time they spend on a prospect or client against the actual client themselves. So it's entirely up to you how you would like to sort that. I hope you found this little session useful, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to support@workbook.net in order to ask any questions. Thank you for your time, guys, and have a nice day.